Hello, and welcome to the first episode of Design Systems Rodeo, a podcast that focuses on the more advanced topics of design systems. I'm your host, Kevin Muldoon. I'm a senior design technologist with Dow Jones. I'm also a writer, a designer, a programmer, and the creator of the Genome Color Palette tool for WCAG contrast compliance in a wide variety of different color systems. Today's rodeo topic is consistently inconsistent with guest Daniel Henderson-Ede. But before we start, let's do a roundup of what's new in design systems this week. One interesting thing is Diana Wallison, who is a design systems designer of Indeed.com, uh, put up a website called a Design System Ignition. And it has events and it has conferences, and it's all in one place. And it was just something she put up because she wanted one place to put things. And she was recently interviewed by Romana Kavexic as a part of her Design System Master Series. So that will be a link that we share, which is Design System Ignition. It's something I put in my own browser that starts up. So what else do we have here? Nate Baldwin published this week an article on medium.com called When Semantic Tokens Are No Longer Semantic. And this is near and dear to my heart. I believe a design system is, uh, the challenges with a design system to me are the semantics, are the words, is the language. So for him to point this out, when does a semantic name become not semantic anymore? Is totally interesting. So you can find that. It's He talks about a Goldilocks zone where token names are not too precise, but they can't be too generic either. And where do you balance that? So that's a very interesting topic. The third thing that was interesting this week is Brad Frost published a follow up article to his concept, which set the design system world on fire. How about a global design system? And his follow-up article is what is next for a global design system, and he clarifies a few points. And it seems like maybe 70% more are design system people are pretty much behind this idea, but there's a pretty significant percentage that are saying this could not possibly happen, a global design system. So that's it for the roundup there, and today's guest is Daniel Henderson-Ede, and he is a senior accessibility designer and design system curator who writes about design systems and accessibility on medium.com. Daniel has been a speaker at conferences such as AXCON and CSUN Assistive Technology Conference, and he's also a member of the W3C Accessibility Guidelines Working Group, which is working to create guidelines for the next version of WCAG. Um, he also contributes and directed the creation of the Figma Web Accessibility Annotation Kit, which is a helpful resource and available to anybody on the Figma community to pull down and use in their own workflow for accessibility notations. So, with that, let's get Daniel in here, and we'll talk about the topic, which is um, consistently consistent. Hey there.
Good morning. How you doing?
Good, good. Where are you calling in from?
I'm in a very thunderstormy Houston, Texas. So if you're watching live, I apologize if there's any flashing lights. I can't control those, unfortunately.
Not a problem. No, Texas is well known for its thunderstorms. So before we start on that topic, I wanted to talk about how did you get into this whole design system craziness that we're in?
Yeah, I've been doing accessibility for a while, and it became pretty clear to me early on that if we're going to do accessibility right at scale, we need design systems to do that because we're constantly implementing the same things over and over again. We keep making our websites and apps more complicated. And so the only way to kind of fight that battle is to have design systems so we can have a central source of truth to be able to implement those things correctly and best practice every time.
Certainly. Do you remember your first design system that you built or were exposed to, and how that maybe inspired you to get more deeply into it?
Yeah, I started my career at the UK government, and as many folks know, the UK government design system is one of the best, especially in terms of accessibility. And so I didn't work directly on it, but I had the pleasure of being able to use it, and it was um, really exciting to see how it actually is, at a time, someone who didn't really understand accessibility or design systems impact me and make me better at what I do, and try and use the same values that they kind of gave to me in the work that I do with other organizations.
Oh, that's awesome. So, yeah, very good. So, yeah, we were talking about earlier about a concept. Well, the title of this is consistently inconsistent, and I believe this has to do with Jacob's law. And maybe you could unpack what Jacob's law is for the audience.
Sure. So it's kind of a silly name, but I think it kind of try to communicate that consistency is something we talk a lot about in design systems. I mean, you look at many definitions of design systems, it talks about consistency, and we're always saying to leadership, hey, we want to do a design system because we want to make consistent applications or consistent websites. And this idea intrigued me because many conversations that I end up being in as an accessibility person, you see conversations like someone say we should make our iOS typography scale match the web so it's consistent. So you want your iOS app and your website, your type scale to be the same, and that's great. You're using the word consistency to back up your points.
Mm-hmm.
And then another person would say, I disagree. We should use the default iOS typography scale so it's consistent. Right? So we're saying so it's consistent twice, two opposite solutions. And so it was interesting to me that we don't, at a design system level, ever really define what consistency means. We just assume, oh, consistency, we know what that means. It means make everything the same, right? But same with what, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything else that you have at your organization or all the other things that are out there. And if you think about Jacob's law, which is, let me find the exact quote so I don't get it wrong, users spend most of their time on other sites. That this means that users prefer your site to work the same way as other sites that they already know. And so what was interesting is if we think about design systems, we're always standardizing best practices within the organization. And so our design system becomes the source of truth for all the things that we do right in our organization. And we often tend to forget that actually we should be also looking at what other people are doing. And it assumes that when you bring something into the design system, that those items that you bring in have come from possibly other sites and are using those best practices and aren't just something brand new. And so there's this weird kind of balance where you can focus too much on a certain type of consistency and affect your design system and your users because you're not thinking about the bigger picture at times.
Certainly. And of course, Jacob's law. I mean, for instance, I mean, I've been, I've gone through several different websites. I know what a button is. I have a pretty firm expectation of what that button's going to do when I engage with, even if it's a different site or a checkbox or a radio button or a slide or a switch. But it seems that I would have that expectation of my website, whether I use the browser of Safari or Chrome or whatever browser I might be using. I would have the same visual, effect. But what happens to Jacob's law when say I use an iOS device versus an Android device?
Yeah, and that's where it's really helpful to look at what the system provides by default. And one of the things that I like to drill down with my design systems teams is take a platform first approach. And what that means is before you start doing any designing yourself, take a look at what the platform that you're working on does. Because it's very easy to kind of skip that step and just design a new button or use what other people in your organization are using. And this platform first approach is is really interesting because I like to think about our design system as a extension library to the platform system that already exists. Like Apple, we have the HIG. On Android, we have material design. On the web, we have the HTML and all the specs that come with it. Our design system should be an extension of those ourselves. We shouldn't forget about them. And most people don't forget about them consciously, but it's easy to kind of, I want them all to look the same. And buttons are one of those examples where they're pretty much the same across all three platforms. Text fields are also very similar. But when you come to things like alerts, is an example of something that's different, right? Where on the web, there's no the native alert is a JavaScript pop-up, which we all hate. So we don't do that. And so we create our own modal, probably with the dialogue element. But on iOS, there's the alert element. And so you see that a lot. And well, to be able to create your own one is difficult. It takes time. It's less accessible, and Apple don't want you to do it. And there's a reason why there's not many APIs to customize it. So,
as a matter of fact, in a lot of ways, you can't even do it. For instance, if I were to request for location access, I at some point I'm going to have to allow the iOS system to present its own native alert for that to be accepted or not.
yeah, and that's where it's really important to take that platform first approach. If you have some designers who just say, I want to do consistency, right? And they don't work closely with their engineers, which is a really important part that our designers and engineers work closely together to know what's possible. You end up with designs that engineering can't very easily implement or at all do them at all. And that's where we end up with this rework and this constant cycle, and we forget, actually, what is consistency? What are we aiming for here? Because we've never created that shared definition of what we're really trying to create.
I totally agree with that, and I think that's a really good case for, let's say, the alert. If I'm on iOS, I'm going to see that native iOS alert. If I'm on Android, I'm going to see that native iOS, or rather native Android alert. There's nothing I could do as a designer to prevent that. But there are other, elements that we could theoretically have control over. Let's say the bottom navigation tab bar, which is different between, let's say, HIG and material. But could they be the same, and would that be terrible?
When I talk about a platform first approach, I always I kind of want an equal amount of consistency between two types of consistency. So I call it consistency within the product, which is kind of what the design system we usually think about doing, with having everything look the same across each app and each website, and then consistency within the user's ecosystem. So what is the user used to? And that kind of relates to the alerts that we talk about, where they're used to seeing an iOS alert. So let's give them an iOS alert. But when we have components that are flexible within the platform, and the navigation bars are a good example, where if you look at Airbnb and Spotify, they are 99% the same between iOS and Android. And because we have those capabilities to customize them, sure, make them look the same, because you made sure that you stuck to the platform standards, and then you're providing that additional level of consistency for the user. So if they're hopping between their iPad and their iPhone, or switching between if you have an Android and an iOS device, that you're getting that similar experience between the two. So absolutely go ahead and make them the same if the platform wants you to make them lets you do that. That's the important part.
What that kind of reminds me is that I'm very passionate about my iOS devices, and you would never see a material, an Android phone in my house. It just would never happen. And I'm wondering if that's true for everybody. You're all, or maybe you do have a mix of, I'm going to have an Android and an iPad. And maybe you have some experience or thoughts on, is that a thing?
I asked this question a lot to people, like, what do you use? And people do have a mixture, but that's usually because they have an old device and a newer device. We're just talking about phones. Like, people tend to switch between iOS and Android every 5 or 6 years. Is to go, oh, I'm going to try this big leap and see if see if I like it now. And usually the answer for me too is no, I still don't like Android. And maybe one day I'll get there. But there are plenty of people who have a MacBook and then use an Android device. And so that is definitely a complete opposite ends of the ecosystems.
Okay, yeah, no, I was just totally curious about that. But I'm wondering, consistently inconsistent. I'm wondering where the boundary might be. Now, if I have to ask the system to do something, I'm going to get a system. Let me step back just a second, because really we're talking about two different design systems. Number one is the brand, and then two, the design system of the environment of whatever you're using. And we seem to be pretty agnostic about that within a web browser, whereas we're almost I certainly feel that I'm on a Android device, no matter where I go. Um, so I suppose the question becomes is that if should I always use, let's say, dialogues, once again, that alert dialogue, just because sometimes in some flows I'm going to have to use that native alert. Does that mean I should always use that for everything? Or should I feel free to create my own dialogue that's custom, that maybe has an image in it or what have you, a little unique bounce? Well, what's your thoughts about that?
I think it depends on two main factors that help you make that decision. I think the first one is where you are in the maturity of your design system. So, like, if you're just starting your design system and stakeholders are expecting you to move fast, don't spend time making a new alert for iOS. Right? There's already an alert there. You can just use that one. Your iOS engineers that are in your organization already know how to use that API. So it's the lower barrier to entry for those engineers. It's faster for you to do. It's also more accessible out of the box because we have things like dynamic font size that we need to support. We have things like increased contrast for the different themes. Those things come for free when we use the stock controls that iOS provides. So if you want to, if you're in that early stage, absolutely use those. Because it's very hard to justify the value in creating a new iOS alert when you're still early days. But if you're in a mature design system, then we think about, like, Spotify is a great example. They've been around for a long time now. They've had that time to think about, okay, how do I do our own custom alert if we're going to do one? And in a similar aspect, the second consideration is how do users use your platform? And then Spotify is another great example. Is I use Spotify on the web, I use it on my iOS device. I'm in this kind of I'm switching between the same service on different mediums, right? And so that's when you start to think, okay, well, if they're using my same service on different devices, maybe we should focus on making sure that our service is really consistent, because I'm in Spotify all day, every day. Jacob's Law starts to become less relevant because I become a dedicated Spotify power user, right? But if you are just a small company that a smaller company that you visit once in a while to do your taxes or something that you don't do very often, it makes less sense to have that consistency between the two and focus more on what the platform provides.
Absolutely, and it depends. You can't just take a blanket. This is always the way. You really do have to consider the UX and the experience of that user and their unique relationship to the product. That's a really good point. Now, I suppose Brad Frost sort of lit the design system world on fire by saying we should have one single design system. And some people are pretty excited about that. Others are like going, I'm not sure that's even possible. And without going into details, I'm wondering, how did you react to that concept, the one single design system to rule them all?
I kind of said to him the other week that we already do, right? Like we already have material design for Android. We already have the HID for the web. Sorry, the HID for iOS. And so when we're talking about the global design system, it's definitely focused more on the website. And like, so when people say we can't do it, I disagree and say we already are doing it, and we can use that framework to build upon. And so I think the web definitely needs to have a global design system because, I think the web aim 1 million, where they view a million homepages through an automated checker. I think they found 96% of homepages had at least one defect. And so there's proof right there that we obviously need something else if we're going to consistently make things accessible. Because when we have fancy home pages that have tabs in them or do some weird scrolling and things, that we need a way to standardize that the best we can and still provide a way to make it flexible and customize it, like Material and iOS do allow you to still customize it. But having another level of abstraction, I think, is really important for the future of the web.
I do too, absolutely. And I do want to keep enough time for anyone to please post questions. We've got a chat here. There should be a link to any questions to a Google Doc. So yeah, please jump in. That's good. But let's say, for instance, because I try to look at things both as an engineer and a designer, and you know, and of course, like I said before, I don't feel very positively about Android anything or Google anything, and probably one of the reasons why I don't is because I really don't like the look and feel of material design. In fact, I've done quite a bit of studies there, and it's just a very limited. No matter what brand I am, I'm going to look like material design if I adopt material design as my design system. So it doesn't seem to check my designer box of the design system I would pick off the shelf and say, okay, well, we're going to do this. And maybe the same is true for iOS. Maybe I do have a very iOS-y feel to it, even though I can put a different color, primary color scheme onto it. But it seems to me that the big challenge, or certainly a challenge I think a lot of people were having with Brad Frost was, okay, great. How do I customize this so it actually looks like what my brand wants it to look like, rather than I'm going to look like Heg, rather than I'm going to look like material design, and the challenges for accessibility to actually have that sort of a creative freedom there. And any do you suppose that we need to have that sort of rigidity in design to actually be able to reliably be accessible in our designs?
I think, if you think about the basics of accessibility in terms of like perceivable, other than the poor the guidelines that we have in WCAG, the principles, perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Like when we think about color contrast is a basic and perceivable, we have to think about, well, there's no way a global design system can control that or should control that. The design tokens that we're able to edit should be totally available for anyone to change. And if you make a mistake and make it inaccessible, that's your responsibility as someone customizing a global design system to make sure you get it right. But there are some things that you need to make sure you get right, and there's lots of semantics. We talk about widgets is a thing that we talk about a lot, and it just basically means custom components. And the Web Accessibility Initiative has components that they built using ARIA that the accessibility community uses all the time. We say, okay, how do we build tabs, or how do we build an accordion, right? And most folks in the accessibility community go there and see what a best practice recommendation is, and we look at some other design systems that we know that are accessible. And so we kind of already are doing this rigid global design system by, there's only so many ways you can make a tab element in code, right? There's a few different things you can make flexible, and maybe we should have some flexibility for that, but there's only a few different ways you can do it. And so having those rigid kind of custom components become no longer custom components, just another layer, is something that we should definitely do. I think if we're going to be able to do these things right over and over again.
That's amazing. Absolutely. So we've got 4 minutes left. Nick popped into the chat here that he believes a global design system is technically possible, and he would love that to happen. But he feels that many companies wouldn't be willing to give up their desire to be differentiated. That every company that does a design system is really trying to put their own unique look and feel embedded into the design system that they create themselves, which I think is I can definitely see that being true. That everybody wants, yes, they want to have a modular system and be able to, scale things in patterns, as it were, but it still has to look like brand X.
Yeah, and we should absolutely be able to customize it and brand it however we want.
Mm-hmm.
And if we think about again like material design or iOS, right, we have a very competitive app store where people are
Mm-hmm.
always trying to get at the top of the charts to have your organization's app be downloaded and differentiate. And you go to an iOS and Android app, it feels like an iOS and Android app, but it also feels like the company's app, right? There's no, unless you don't customize anything at all, you can tell what app you're usually in by the way it looks, even though it's using a very similar set of components and information architecture. We have our very simplistic views over and over again.
Sure.
But if you're in a banking app, you know what bank you're banking with, even though the home screen looks the same, pretty much the same on every banking app. Is, hey, here's how much money you do or don't have, and that's usually what they do.
Yeah, absolutely. It's not as if we're designing for Goldfish, where they forgot that 3 seconds ago they pushed the Bank of America button on their iPhone. They push the button, they launch the app, they see Bank of America. Absolutely, yes, certainly. That Goldfish design seems to pop up more than I would prefer. It happens quite a bit. So yeah, we've got what other things? I wonder what could we as designers. You know what? Let's try this for a thing, because I think we almost instinctively understand that iOS and Android are just going to look like them. I do remember someone actually saying we should never on the web actually do a calendar. We should never create a calendar for our web apps. And I'm just going to straight out say I think that was a silly thing for someone to say. But on the other hand, it does sort of map towards, well, why not? I mean, if Android's going to look different than iOS, why couldn't browser Chrome look different on a date picker than, let's say, another type of a browser?
I mean, if we think about the kind of the user agent inputs that we're able to get, with the input element, we're able to change the type. Each user agent or each browser usually provides a different interface to how to input detail. So actually, if you use input dates, if you go on Edge, you do get a date picker. I'm trying to remember on Safari. I don't know if I can't remember if you do or you don't on the Mac. You definitely get a kind of a weird masking sort of format. And then if you go on your iOS device, you always get a date picker. And so one of the reasons that folks sometimes say don't make a date picker is because, well, we do have it in some cases, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so we don't have it in all cases. And you're assuming that only people on iOS need a date picker versus someone who may be using Safari or another user agent on their desktop that doesn't have a date picker. Mm-hmm. So it's very important to have date pickers in some instances. Like, if you're trying to book a flight or you're trying to book a vacation property, like you need to be able to look at those dates and think, okay, I want it to be Saturday to Saturday. I actually don't know what dates those are. I just know I want to go from Saturday to Saturday. And so it is really important to have date pickers. But using those in the right context is important. Like date of birth is a place that I always advocate we avoid date pickers,
Oh,
because
okay.
the older you get, the further you have to scroll.
Sure.
And so people don't like thinking about how old they are, but every time you sign up for something, you have to scroll further and further and further back. And
Yeah, I feel that intrinsically, by the way, being a man of a certain age, that scroll just makes me feel very bad every time. Well, oh my gosh, we are out of time. Let's see, maybe we've got time for one more. Carolyn says, if we are all looking at what already exists and is most commonly used, how do we strive to innovate and come up with something new that also provides good UX? Yeah. So maybe another way to say that is that when should I make a new date picker that's, when can I use my creativity to actually innovate?
there's lots of problems that we have to solve for in our experiences.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons that we have design systems, and it's the same reason we hear over and over again, is I don't want to use a design system because it loses my creativity.
Mhm.
Well, actually, no, it speeds up your creativity, because rather than having to design the same basic set of components over again, you can focus on the real problems that users are actually being faced with that you're trying to solve. And so, with the whole consistency argument, it's the same thing across platforms. Is actually you spend a lot of time trying to make sure that iOS, Android, and web look identical. You don't really need to do that, and it actually goes against lots of principles. So if you stick to what the platform has, you can then innovate in those different environments and find alignment where you can, and still have that innovation that users like to see when you're making something new.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Daniel, thank you so much for taking the time and chatting about this really cool topic. It just seems to be like just one of those topics that just keeps popping up if you do design systems, and it's just a great to chat about it and think about it from different perspectives. So I really appreciate your time on that, Daniel.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. Yeah, so we're going to close it out right now. And thank everyone for joining and listening. We'll have this published so anyone can share. And, please check out some of the links that we're going to post as well. And once again, thank you. And we'll do it again soon. Bye, guys.